Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Worcester Township Board of Supervisors work session for August 17th, 2022. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My name is Rick DeLello. I am the chairman of the board. To my right is Steve Quigley. To my left is an empty seat where Lou Betts typically sits, but Lou has a family situation he's dealing with and is unable to attend tonight. On the side table for our work session, we're a little lean, but we have Nicole Quagliarello, I hope I said that close to correct, in the neighborhood, who is our finance director, and we have Paul Leonard, who is our interim township manager, joining as well. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight? Okay, seeing none, then our first item is public comment. If anybody has any public comment for the board tonight, we do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment? Seeing none, we will move on. We have one item for our work session tonight, which is a presentation. We've done this the last few years, but we have Cindy from B. Bergball, who is our auditor, and she's going to give a short presentation to us regarding this year's audit and offer her insights, and then there'll be a little bit of Q&A thereafter. So Cindy, I'd ask you if you could come to the front table and the mic, and just pull the mic close to you so we can get you on the recording, and we'll go from there.
All right, how's this?
That's perfect.
Okay, good. Well, also, first of all, Stacia Devlin, one of my fellow partners, is off this week. Her daughter is getting married on Saturday, so I am taking her place. She left me copious notes, but I do want to start by thanking Nicole and your team at the township. Everything went really smoothly with the audit. So tonight's presentation is a high overview of the audit, and you have before you a PowerPoint presentation of what the financial summaries are. The audit includes the township financial statements, the Department of Community and Economic Development report, and then concise financial statements for publication in the local paper. In conjunction with the audit, there are some services that we provide that are not audit services. In audit lingo, they're non-attest services, and that is that we propose adjusting or correcting entries. There were very few adjusting entries. They were typical year-end audit, what I would call audit close entries, not necessarily entries to correct an error. We assisted with preparing the financial statements. This was noted in our engagement letter. And based on the township additions and deletions, we prepare the capital asset schedule for the township and update that each year.
Okay.
Just as a highlight, an audit is not 100%. We don't look at every item. We do a testing of that. Everything was neat and orderly, and we found supporting documentation for all the items tested. An audit involves assessing risk. Every community has some level of risk. There's no quote-unquote perfect community. So there is always the risk of management override and the idea of segregation of duties. In your case, just one thing to keep in mind going forward, because you did have some staffing transition with Stacy and Tommy leaving. So just be mindful of do any of the responsibilities change? You have Paul, is there some functions that Stacy might have performed that provide an extra layer? And just be mindful of maintaining those segregation of duties. And you have escrows because you're holding that money for other people. We zero on that in a little more detail in the audit. Credit cards, historically, not necessarily here, but in other places, sometimes there are issues with credit card usage, so it is something that we test at our clients. And so those are the risks that we identified, and then the audit was designed accordingly. The financial statements, you have a clean opinion. The information was fairly stated. When we look ahead, as far as accounting standards, there's a new standard on leases. So the property that you rent, so right now you might have rent expense on your books. At the end of the year on your formal financial statements, the property that you rent will be capitalized as a right-to-use asset, and the debt will be recorded. It seems a little redundant. Many people are not happy about the standard, but it's passed nonetheless. So that will go into effect.
Well, they did warn us for about 2 years before
Yes.
it happened, even though nobody
Yes.
particularly cared for it.
Exactly, exactly. So it is coming your way, and we'll work with Nicole will put together a schedule of items that you rent and making that calculation. So we're going to move on to the bar charts, and you'll see, if you eyeball across, you'll see the increase in blue in highways this year. You had increased road program expenditures, and then that also includes a payment for the volunteer fire truck. So that's that big jump up in the year.
Okay.
The pictorial view, the next chart, the pie chart, that's very similar year to year, so you'll see that the majority of your revenue comes from taxes, and that largely is your earned income tax. When we go on to the following chart, that looks at your expenses in all of your funds, except for the pension funds and the sewer fund. Very similar chart to prior year. Public Works is your largest expense, followed by general, and then the others you'll see there. The next chart, the items in blue, you'll see capital outlays. That's going to vary from year to year depending on your capital plans and what you have projected. The following chart is a detail of your taxes. And you'll see that transfer tax jumping up the last 2 years because of all the housing movement. Earned income, also more people working from home, so you get the benefit of that earned income tax. Do you have any questions? I'm kind of breezing through these, but I know at this point this is very
So
familiar.
just one
territory
quick
for you.
thing for our audience members. We'll upload this to the website. Normally, we didn't quite get mastered on the some of the items that Tommy typically handles and getting set up, but we'll make sure the copy of this is up on the website for anybody who wants to look at the PowerPoint with the details that she's talking about.
Good, thank you. The next chart shows general fund operations and shows the trends in revenues, expenditures, and fund balance over the years. You see, steady, 2021 jumping up. Real estate transfer tax, again, the housing market, that was up by 130,000. Earned income tax up by 400,000, again, the work from home situations. And then building permit fees, growth in the area, and that was 116,000.
Does any of the revenue that we received, so we received approximately $500,000 last year, and we're going to have another $500,000 this year from the government relative to the COVID, and is it the ARPA? I think it's the ARPA funds.
Right.
Is that reflected in the 2021 audit, or are these revenues just specific to our tax sources?
Correct, they're just specific to other revenue sources. If I remember correctly, it's probably deferred, so it's not on your, you'll recognize it as revenue in 2022 or when you start using it.
Got it.
On that. The next chart, the red and blue chart, shows your sewer fund over the years. So you'll see some variation in that. It's usually due to tapping fees, depending on the developments that you have during that year. In 2021, that was due to tapping fees from Toll and Meadowood, and then there was a rate increase. And that is the quick
It is a
walk through the
perfect
audit.
summary. I have a few questions. Some of them are standard that I ask every year, and then I'll hand it to Steve if he has some questions as well. And then based on time, if anybody from the audience has a question or two, is typically how we go about it. So you had mentioned sort of segregation of duties as one of your items. And maybe if you could just, one of my standard questions is typically, do you feel that we adequately handle that as a township? I know I sign the checks. I know that they go through a process before they get to me. In terms of your assessment, maybe you could offer just a little bit of insight in terms of how you think we do that. And then there's sort of a sub-question there that, speaking of, say, outsourcing, we're seeing that more and more in some of our neighboring communities in order to cover for different resources. And if you have any thoughts that maybe you can offer in terms of how we would align that to segregation of duties as well.
Okay, sure. So as far as segregation of duties, the way your system is designed, township manager, assistant, finance director, Nicole, yourselves as the board, everybody's doing different parts. Even different people take in the money from the front desk and things. So you do see a number of different people involved at all processes. As you noted, the board reviewing the monthly reports, looking at revenues and expenses compared to budget. From our review of the minutes, you're not just checking the box. There are some substantive conversations. There's questions asked if there's variances. So that's a really important control feature that you're looking at that, you're signing the checks. And then between the time the money comes in and gets recorded on the books, there's a few people involved in that process. So the answer would be yes, you have a good segregation of duties there.
Okay. And then if we are in situations where we might outsource, would you recommend, are there unique things we should do differently if we run into a scenario where we have to outsource a task that, might touch something financially?
Right. Are you, in terms of outsourcing, are you saying, like, so right now Paul is your interim manager, so he would take over whatever duties Tommy had in the finances? So as long as it's kind of person one to one, so if you've outsourced that specific person's duties, then they will assume those duties. I think there's a nice part is Nicole being here, that common thread. Nicole will be able to say, oh, Tommy did this or Stacy did that, to make sure that there's no gaps.
Okay, perfect. And then we didn't really talk about it in your presentation, but in years past, we've talked a little bit about restricted versus unrestricted funds. And I'd like to maybe have you just sort of explain that a little bit so we can get it on the recording. People occasionally ask. And then just sort of a subset of that, if you think in terms of, say, committed versus, what was the other one, assigned. So you start reading through some of these things. There's going to be a follow-up question there, but maybe you could sort of categorize sort of how they fit into how we're structured, and then I'm going to ask a question from there.
And you did a good job with the restricted, committed, assigned, because then visually you get this idea: restricted is the highest level of restrictions, then committed, and then assigned. So restricted is from the outside. So it's not you as a board, it's not township management. It is somebody comes and they give you the money, whether it's use this state grant to purchase the parks. That's a restriction from the outside. You got debt service for sewer improvements or whatever that may be. So that would be restricted. So whenever you think of restricted, you're thinking of outside. When you think of committed or assigned, that's going to be from within. And generally, committed is going to be just simply stronger than assigned. So committed might be with a board resolution. And then assigned could be at the management level. So your township manager could say, we're going to assign something. Usually what we see is that the township manager will bring it before the board anyhow. It's so interesting because even though they have the level of committed, meaning something between restricted and assigned, I don't see people using committed that much. I tend to see just assigned and restricted because it starts to getting, confusing. But to your question, though, let me let you get your question in.
So earlier this year, we put in place an open space program that allows for residents to make donations. Okay. There's a township match as sort of a first step in terms of that particular program. And I guess part of what we're thinking, or at least we want to have conversation about going forward, is how to properly sort of categorize those items and then sort of have the structure in place. Would that be recommended through board resolution? Because obviously if somebody's making a specific donation to the program, their anticipation is going to be that that's where the money goes. And then we obviously want to make sure that we're structurally doing that correctly, and then just going forward, sort of making sure. And that would just be one example, but if there were some other way, like we talked about the ARPA funds coming from, if we made a decision how we might utilize them, maybe that might be assigned versus, just in terms of saying, hey, this is how we might consider earmarking that, but it doesn't maybe have the same teeth, if you will.
Those are good examples to illustrate this. So you told the residents, if you donate money, it's going to open space. So now it's restricted because it's coming from the outside. They're giving money.
Okay.
And because you said you would match it, when you match the money, that becomes restricted as well because the person is donating it with the mindset, oh, this is going to be matched. So that kind of gives, even though it's coming from within, because you said you would match it, that will stay. Let's say the fund gets to be $500,000, and then the township also says, oh, I think we'll also add $200,000, but it's not necessarily a match. That part could be the assigned part.
Okay.
And assigned, you can unassign. So maybe you have a plan to do something, you get open space, there's $50,000 left over, you can unassign it. But if there was $50,000 left over and somebody had donated it to the open space fund, it would just have to sit there till the next open space comes.
Okay.
The ARPA money, the government has restricted it for now a wide variety of purposes.
Some unique ways.
Right, yes. But so it is restricted because it is for those purposes, but then you're absolutely right. Along the way, you might say, we'll do it this, this, and this, but you could change your mind because there are other things that you can change too as you go.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's good.
And then just in a very broad sense, and then I'll turn it over to Steve for any questions he has. In terms of, there's been a lot of conversation in terms of the assets we currently have, the cash balances we currently have. I know that you guys, again, it's a fine line between doing an audit and making recommendations, but we always like to get some insight in terms of, are we properly capitalized in terms of what our structure is? And I know that's not it's a tough question to answer, but we've got to ask it every year, and certainly that's something we're always curious to say, are we on track, for future rainy day money that we might need, and then certainly opportunities to take advantage and leverage that we're doing very well from a community standpoint. We've got a very stable tax revenue source over many years that we can use for predictive reporting going forward.
Right, that's a good thing to be thinking about, especially you were growing, and then a little bit more stable. I know that there's still growth happening. So can you refresh my memory? Do you have a 5-year capital plan where you've planned out for 5 years? We're going to do this with the roads, this with a public works truck, things like that.
So we actually have, I think it's a 3, 5, 7, and 10 in terms of things that are in our budget.
Okay.
I don't know. So the short answer is yes, but how that's exactly sort of laid out, I'm not sure the year sequence. We certainly, with the road program, define very specifically over periods of time sort of where we're aligning the road program, and we have a lot of projects that we now incorporate into as attachments to the budget that talk about some of these big capital items. So the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is I don't know the depth of that offhand.
That's good. So some sort of 5-year plan, it really starts with your capital plans, and that includes equipment and then road repairs. And then to the extent for your sewer, those types of things, that's kind of your start. And sometimes what we'll run into is people have listings, but they haven't estimated the costs of each item. So in year 5, we'll have to work on these different roads, but the engineers haven't projected how much will that cost. So if you don't already have the costs in there, you could go to your engineer if it's related to roads or sewers and say, could you project what that would be? Because then you get a sense of the dollars that you would need.
Right.
And then that's going to help answer your question. We know we have this much in the bank right now. Does that make sense for the future?
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to turn it to you.
Yes, Rick, thank you. I think you covered a lot of the topics that need to be covered. I think, as she mentioned, the capital plan or the 5-year plan, I think Worcester has been very blessed over the years of having the money there, where maybe where Paul came from. When you have public service departments such as the police force that takes 75 to 80% of your budget, you really have to scrounge then. And we've been very fortunate in Worcester not having to cut programs or projects or saying we can't do this or can't do that. Looking at our largest expenditure is the roads. It's almost doubled in the last 5 years, the amount of money we're spent fixing roads. And that's one of the issues we hear a lot from the township residents are the roads. And during our program, we have the road master as well as engineer go out and make a list of that. And I guess a lot of times it's based on the liquid fuels tax and the money we bring in that gets implemented into that. But as far as the other costs, I mean, it'd be pretty hard to say it's not a straight line pattern for all the expenses for the public safety, the general, the cultural and rec, and the miscellaneous. It's interesting how it's straight there, except the only blip in the radar screen is the road work. So it's something that the residents are concerned about, and we do try to maintain them. And if we have to spend the money there, that's a place where it's usually spent. I think the audit speaks for itself. I think, as I said before, the township does a good job budgeting their money and where the money is being spent. I think with a lot of these new homes coming in with as you pointed out, the increase in the revenue coming in from the taxes, it's amazing when the houses go from selling at $300,000 to $400,000, and most of the homes down there in that golf course are coming in. The townhouses are costing $750,000, and the homes are up to approaching 1.75 million. And I just,
Right.
It's interesting. Overall, I think the presentation is good. As I said, the we don't get much from the property tax. It all goes to the school district, but it's just, these people have to pay that tax. We don't get the revenue from it, but as you pointed out, the earned income has gone up quite a bit due to COVID. We were, not to say blessed with COVID, but it's brought some money into our pockets. So I think overall, Rick, you've been on for the 5 years here looking at it, and I think the growth, the expenses have all been in check. We've had pretty good reviews as far as the audits. I think we're in a pretty good place, but once again, we're very fortunate in Worcester not to have the expenses of the public safety, which I believe Jim Garrity said. I think Jim Garrity was our old solicitor, and I think he was on the Cheltenham pension fund for the police or something.
Right.
And I think the expenses down there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of the budget, which is an awful lot of money. And I know Whip Payne just did something over there, and their costs are pretty much in line with that. So we can keep hoarding our money for a little bit, I guess, until the pressures from above dictate we have to make changes. But we're very fortunate right now.
That day's coming. We don't know when.
We don't know when. We keep saying it's coming, but as long as we can hold it off, we can keep paying our bills. So I thank you for the audit. I think the financial analysis shows the township is, I guess, being fiscally responsible, and we're able to pay our bills and buy what we needed. I did get some comments from the work crew the other day. They like working here because the machinery's good. They're not running with pieces of machinery that are broken and have to keep fixing. If they need something, we're able to use the township resources to keep the public works department running, which it's important. That's one of the things we've often said, that they're the face of the community.
Right.
They see the people in the community a lot more than the supervisors do, and they have more interaction, either snow plowing or mowing the lawns or doing the fence banks for the people. Most people seem to be appreciative of that. So another question. Thank you.
Excellent. Any closing comments, or it feels like I feel good? Every answer I got, I like.
Good.
So I think I'm happy. Any closing comments from you?
No, just want to thank everybody and enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you,
Excellent.
Nicole.
Thanks for filling in.
Okay, so next up, we have other business. Do we have any other business for our work session tonight, Steve?
Rick, something I'll maybe say it now and say it again later on,
Okay.
is that I've been contacted a few times by Matt Bradford's office. He's our state rep. He's been contacted by the soccer programs in the area regarding our fields. I guess maybe they've contacted you as well. I think they had reached out to Tommy a couple different times. There were some conversations going on. With Tommy not being here, I thought maybe a representative may show up maybe later on at the meeting, but
Okay.
they're interested in working with the township to try to make the fields better, maybe getting some aid from the state through Mr. Bradford's office. I guess the fields are used heavily by the Methacton organizations.
Right.
And of course, they say it's mostly township residents on those teams, so therefore they're concerned about the safety of the kids on the field. So I think that's something we have to look forward to in the future, maybe a presentation from someone from one of the soccer associations. So other than that, I have no other new things to bring up.
Excellent. We'll certainly make sure. Nobody has contacted me directly, but that is certainly each fall we tend to get that call. So it's coming soon enough. Okay, so public comment on the back side of the work session. Does anybody have any public comment for our work session at this time? Winnie?
Because the work session was so efficient, we're at 7 o'clock, I'm going to use the time to try to gather a little bit of information.
Okay.
I know there are plans in the works to widen parts of Valley Forge Road,
Correct.
and I know that's a state road, but I know that they pay attention to what the township's looking for. I've heard some residents asking questions about what side of the road will be taken where, and what will it cost us in terms of some of the trees and loss of front yards for people that are located on Valley Forge. Can you all update us on what's happening with Valley Forge Road and the plan?
So To a certain degree, yes, we can update. So we actually have an agenda item in our business meeting tonight to discuss that particular project, because there has been conversation with the residents who have been impacted, and there's a process now that we're going through of acquiring the different components that are necessary for there's a couple things. The widening isn't happening quickly, as these projects take a long time to work their way through. McMahon did exhaustive work to try to be as minimus as possible while still sort of honoring what the road topography required and what we had a grant that allowed it to get started. We're now at the stage of sort of handling the takings with those residents that are impacted. It's on both sides. It's hard to sort of pin down. I forget the number of properties, but there's a number of properties that are impacted from Skipback all the way up to Germantown. So it's hard to say. There certainly was an effort to avoid as many trees as possible, but there certainly are some trees that are going to be impacted because of the ability to put a bike lane. You know, one of the particular grant was what they call multimodal or dual modal, where it's not just cars, but it's also aligning for bikes as well. That was one of the requirements. So it's necessary. You just from a practical sense can't house by house say, well, we're going to take, where you're moving back and forth to try to account for trees that you might like to keep. So certainly with each resident, that discussion took place. I know where the Natural Lands Trust is specifically, there had been some conversation there, and they were comfortable ultimately with sort of what the plan was laid out, and I know it does impact some trees. I know Bert had mentioned that at a meeting several months ago now, but that was...
Old trees, a couple of...
That's fair. It's part of the trade-off in terms of getting the road improved in terms of that. So there certainly is an effort to sort of minimize that, but in full candor, certainly some trees get impacted along the way. I know there's a lot of stuff that's online. I can't speak specifically property by property.
So the online stuff, does it have pictorial representation? If we go on our website, can we find it? What the plan
You should,
is?
all of that documentation should be out there, and I haven't looked recently to see what specifically was uploaded, but the short answer is yes, the actual plans are out there. Now, I don't know if there were, what that entails specifically. I haven't looked recently, but certainly when you go out there, what I would say is if you don't see something there that you think you should, to just contact the township office, and we'll make sure we'll get whatever is necessary uploaded in that regard.
And in conjunction with that widening program, and hopefully we'll see something on the township website, have decisions been made about the addition of lights at specific intersections? And can you share that? Or
It hasn't, those haven't been specifically determined. They're part of the engineering, but there hasn't been a formal, there's going to be, so Woodland is one area specifically where there's a light proposed there very specifically. In terms of the other locations, there is conversation that has taken place about the timing of lights and some of those elements, but that I think is the only one specifically where they're saying, hey, this is part of the project, that there's going to be a light. That certainly is an intersection that folks have talked about for a long time.
Given the nature of this project, which will have a big impact on the township, is there a plan for a public hearing so that people can see the plan, give you feedback, that kind of stuff? Or, and to have any impact, the state would have to be involved, or is that out of the question?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I don't know what we can or can't do in terms of that, and there's a design that's been put forward. I don't know if that is something that then kind of goes back for additional editing and community input. There certainly were lots of conversations that the engineers went through, but the short answer is I'm not sure, but we certainly, again, that's something we're still far enough away that if those conversations should happen, certainly that's something to look into.
Yeah, I think community input's always good. A second quick question concerns our updated comprehensive plan.
Yep.
Where I know the turnout for the last public meeting specific to that was not great. And I don't know if there's a desire to do another public meeting. If we do, a suggestion would be to advertise it in different ways than what's gone on before, because it just doesn't reach enough people, announcing it in the Times Herald and things like that. But in any case, where are we with that?
So we have a work session with the Planning Commission for September. That's sort of the
Okay.
next step in terms of that, and then from there, it'll go, the outcome of that meeting will then be us sort of getting it coordinated for adoption later in the year. But the next step is that the joint meeting. So the Planning Commission had it for a period of time after, after the task force passed it over there. They've gone through their elements, and then a joint meeting with us where there'll be input from them saying, hey, we're happy with it, or we want to offer this input, and then we'll make some determinations.
And there'll be opportunity for the residents to provide additional input at that point, or no?
Well, that's where that meeting would be. I mean, it's the work session for next month. It's similar to what we had tonight, in terms of discussing the topic there. And certainly residents would have opportunity to put input in public comment. It's not, it's the traditional work session like this is, but certainly it's not, there's not an ultimate decision coming out of that unless there's consensus in the room at that time. But we're not adopting it in that meeting, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think the purpose really we had so many people in the task force to get a well-rounded number of people from different points in the township. And I don't think it's going to turn into a public referendum on it. I think we're going to have a work session with the comprehensive team and just see where it's at. Maybe I'm off with that, but I think we're going to either accept the program and say, thanks, guys, for the good work you did, and move on. Because it's probably been a couple of years, I guess.
Right, it has. And I think as a member of that task force, my understanding would be that the Planning Commission would take hold of the work we had done where it was,
Right.
work with it some more, and then get it back to you all. If you have issues, it might come back again, but to the Planning Commission.
Correct.
I just wanted to know where we were with the
Yep.
process. Do you expect that this is going to be finalized by the end of the year?
That's certainly the goal. Certainly his goal is to be done with it that was the plan when we laid it out, was to be done by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any public comment for the board? Excellent. Seeing none, motion to adjourn.